I'm so pleased to be with you this morning and have a chance at this point to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Al Condeluci. For the past 4 years, Al has been associated with CLASS, C-L-A-S-S, which is Community Living and Support Services. This is a full-service, nonprofit organization supporting people with disabilities. Al holds faculty appointments with the University of Pittsburgh School of Health. He serves, as you know, as a consultant, collaborator, lecturer, and he has extensively traveled around the country and author of numerous books. Al has challenged many audiences, as he will with you today, you will see, on building community capacities. I've had the opportunity to hear Al, 10, 15 years ago. You know, we've all gotten a little older, a little gray hair. I think when I first heard him, it was with a program that the council supported partners in policy making, and we probably have some of those participants here today. Al, you will see, he's very passionate about what he does. You'll see he's energetic. I remember the first speech he was talking, and I think when he finished, we were all it was so much information. You know, he was pacing, he was passionate, and we were listening, and then we were tired. But again, I'm honored, and I would be very grateful if you help me to welcome Dr. Condeluci.
Thanks so much for this kind invitation to be a part of the gathering and to share some ideas today. And you know, the notion of respite has been something that I have been personally involved in from my youngest days to just a couple years ago with the passing of my mom. And the caregiving that is sort of deeply embedded into my heart really started on our family hill. I live in Pittsburgh and live up on a big hill with right today we have 17 family members. When I was born and growing up on the hill, there were 8 Condeluci families who lived there. But you know, Italians proliferate, and so we have now 17 families, and I'm actually happy to tell you. In fact, Gary, I didn't tell you this morning, my dear friend Gary Edwards, I had a chance to catch up with this morning, became a grandpa just a week and a half ago. The first time. My son Dante up on the hill, he and his wife Heather had their first child. So, but growing up on the hill, my best buddy was my cousin Carrie. And Carrie had Down syndrome. Right? But I never really realized that or understood any difference from Carrie. She was just a natural part of our family. Carrie needed a little bit of support, but that was just natural to us. In fact, I didn't realize until I actually went off to school, Carrie didn't go to school, that there was a difference in terms of how she was seen in our society and in our culture. But we just sort of took care of Carrie. She was just part of us. We were just naturally involved in supporting Carrie, and we did that really all the way through Carrie's life. Carrie was involved in some programs, but never lived anywhere but with our family. And then later in my life, my dad being diagnosed with Parkinson's and requiring some support. And we all know how difficult it is to get respite supports in our community. It's an incredibly underfunded or no funding necessary support. And when our family reached out to try to get some supports for Dad, we couldn't get the funding, and so consequently we just sort of banded together as a family and took care of Dad. And we were offered possibilities for Dad to go into an institution, but we rejected that, right? It wasn't something that we wanted as a family. My dad didn't want it. He wanted to stay on Condeluci Hill, and we made a pledge to him that he would. And as his Parkinson's became more overt as he aged, his needs were greater, supporting Dad all the way through his passing. And then just a couple years after Dad, Mom's situation occurred with very severe arthritis and some diabetes and some visual issues. And again, made the pledge as a family that we were just going to take care of Mom. And so this notion of supporting people in the community is something that's sort of deeply woven into my fabric. It's just a part of life. However, one of the things that I really want to share with you today is that the sharing of the challenges that we face as caregivers, or that the families that you support as a professional, are really enhanced through the notion of social capital. Right? And I want to just sort of tighten this up a little bit and then share with you what we know about this thing called social capital. As I mentioned, when Carrie was growing up, and one of the things that Carrie really wanted, just like we all wanted, was to be active in community, to engage in community, to participate in the community. And so we thought, what's the best way we could help Carrie do that? And so when we referred Carrie to agencies that support people with Down syndrome or support people with intellectual disabilities, their sort of approach to trying to help Carrie engage more was framed really from a micro perspective. That is, Carrie was seen as having a problem, and the intervention that was recommended to really help Carrie with the problem was to try to somehow, some way, change Carrie, fix Carrie, try to ameliorate some of the manifestations of her condition. And the onus of engagement, the onus of change was really on Carrie. That if Carrie wasn't able to become more functional and more independent in her skills, then the system began to say, well, if she can't do those things, we'll find places for her. And so what actually began to happen in human services is when we begin to input micro interventions, and especially in situations where we have conditions that are very challenging and the micro intervention is not going to really make that much of a difference, then the way the system begins to support people is to silo them, put them into programs and services in separate places. And this is historic in human services. I know we've got a lot of folks who have been out in the field for many, many years, and the focus of human service still remains micro in orientation. It sees the person, my dad, for example, with his Parkinson's, as having a problem. He shook, and he started to tremor as his Parkinson's began to manifest. And so the intervention for Dad was, well, let's try to stop him from shaking. That's a micro intervention, right? Now, with Carrie and with my dad, you can only go so far. For example, with Carrie had a cleft palate that affected her speech. And she, when she would speak, it was kind of garbled and it was hard to understand. Our family understood Carrie. Anything that she had or wanted, we understood that. But everybody else in the community didn't understand Carrie. Right? And so when we got Carrie involved in programs, they said, well, we have to get Carrie speech therapy, right, to help Carrie speak better. so she can engage, right? And all the speech therapy that Carrie went through really never fixed her speech challenge. You know, maybe she was able to enunciate a little bit better, but it still was garbled to the rest of the community. And consequently, the notion of community engagement, of being active in community, was, was taken off the table. And what was available to Carrie was special services for people with Down syndrome, where she could be in a group home, or she could be in a support group, or she could be in a sheltered workshop, or some other sort of congregative effort. Okay? So this micro approach to human services has never really delivered the goods. It hasn't really created a greater sense of engagement, right? And so as a thinker, as a human service professional, when Myra introduced me and talked a little bit about my path, right? I've been involved in running an agency called CLASS. It used to be a UCP affiliate, and we became autonomous from UCP about 7-8 years ago. So CLASS, nonprofit agency, I've been there since 1973, right? And so lots of years in the field, really trying to promote micro programs, okay? And after a while, I began to sort of scratch my head and say that these micro programs really weren't changing the community. They really weren't helping families with the goal of engagement. And so I got introduced to macro thinking, right? To not micro thinking, but macro thinking. If you can't change Carrie's speech, what can you change? How everybody else listens, right? And so this idea of macro change is really, the target is not the individual with the disability or the person aging. The target is the community. How do we change the community so they listen better? How do we change the community so they're more hospitable, more welcoming, more loving to people who have been shunned or devalued? Right? And so I got really involved and excited about this idea of macro change as a professional. And so I started to study it, off to graduate school, really looking at macro issues and how can we change the community. And what I was introduced to early on in my career was the way we change the community to be more receptive of people who are devalued or struggling with some kind of a situation or condition is we have to pass laws. Right? We just heard from, Senator Collins talking about passing a law to promote respite. And, that makes sense, right? Laws do create sort of a start point. And so as an advocate for macro change, how do we change the community so they can be more accepting of Carrie, more accepting of my dad, right? How do we change them? I started to really jump into this idea of passing laws. Regulations, rules, and so, got really involved, became a radical change agent that really was promoting them. The very first thing that I jumped into was the right to education, Public Law 94-142, which we passed in 1976. That really, for the very first time, people like Carrie could go to school, right? For the very first, 1976. And then, we passed the Urban and Housing Development Act, and we passed the Vocational Rehabilitation Act, and we passed the Urban Mass Transit Act, and then the big enchilada we passed just in 1990, which was the ADA, right? The Americans with Disabilities Act. And so we were passing all these laws. Lots of things were happening in Congress and in state capitals around the country. And then I paused and said, have these laws really changed the heart of our society, of our culture? Have they really changed the way people embrace somebody who's different or somebody who's struggling with a disability? And when I looked around, the answer to that was no, right? I mean, even today with Public Law 94-142, kids with disabilities sit in the back of the room. Even today. And not just that, the passage of something like the ADA has really begun, people have rejected it. And I'm going to guarantee you that we're going to hear from the Trump administration about, deregulating something like ADA because it creates a hardship on businesses. That's what we're going to hear. That's the rhetoric, right? So this notion of laws changing society only goes so far. Now, I really believe that we can change things through laws, and we have to stay devoted to that. But it doesn't go all the way in changing the heart of a society. And so I was really frustrated about this. I went back to graduate school, and I was working on my doctorate, and I'm at the University of Pittsburgh, and one day a buddy of mine who was classmate, he said, "Al, there's a lecture going on in campus tonight about social capital." I said, I never heard that term. I go, "What is social capital? What is it?" And he says, "I don't know, but there's a guy coming in from Harvard. He's going to Harvard, and he's going to talk about social capital." So I went to this lecture. This is 1984. 1984, right? I go to this lecture, and there's a professor from Harvard. His name is Robert Putnam. And in fact, he's still very active at Harvard, writing and talking about social capital. And he made a statement that night that, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where things are sort of foggy and you're not really sure and the clouds are in your way and you can't see clearly to where your goal is. And then all of a sudden you hear something or maybe you read something and it parts the clouds. So Robert Putnam said that day at the University of Pittsburgh, in the very early stages of his career, that the way we change people's hearts in order to create a more loving or more giving community is not through the passage of laws, it's through the creation of relationships. Relationships. And that's actually what social capital means. And what I want to share with you, ever since that speech that I heard Robert Putnam give, I have been on an odyssey of trying to understand this notion of social capital and how it can really apply, and especially how it can apply in respite, right? So I want to just articulate what we know about social capital that has been initiated through lots of interesting sociological studies. And I'm going to tell you about some studies that we've been doing, actually, through Chatham University, one of our great schools in Pittsburgh, to begin to look at family engagement, right? So you have individual engagement, Carrie mixing it up with the community. You also have families to engage. And what we know is that individuals with disabilities, whether they were born with their disability or whether they acquired it later in life, like my dad, become disconnected and become socially isolated. Now, we also now are discovering that families who have children with disabilities or elders with chronic and struggling disabilities, that those families are becoming socially isolated. And that here's the deal about social isolation. It is more lethal than smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. That as many people in the United States of America die from social isolation as die from all smoke-related diseases and illnesses every year. Every year. Social isolation kills people. Social isolation creates incredible vulnerability for families and for individuals. The antidote to social isolation is social capital. Right? Building, maintaining, and retaining relationships. So let me just kind of share with you what we know, what we're studying, what new horizons are out there for this construct of social capital, but more, how does it apply to us that are really interested in respite? And how might we be able to take some of the strategic notions of social capital and apply them into the work that we do every day? Okay? So what is social capital? Okay? And right from the jump, social capital is the friendships and relationships that we develop. It was first coined as a term in the sociological literature in 1914. Right? So it's relatively new, 1914. First time we saw any reference to social capital. And it was actually referred to by a school teacher who wrote an article about student success. And this was a school teacher in West Virginia. And it was a small little community. And what he discovered was that the kids who did better after they graduated weren't the smartest kids in the class. They were the kids who developed relationships, who had this sort of connectability with other people. Those were the kids that did better. And so Hannafin, the guy who coined the phrase, called it social capital. And what the suggestion is that our relationships are valuable to us. They're actually valuable. And I'll share with you the three major ways relationships are valuable to individuals and to families. Right? And so, the philosophy behind social capital is not the philosophy of independence, it's the philosophy of interdependence. Now those are really two different phenomena. In fact, psychologists will tell us that there are three sort of paradigms of connectability, right? There's the paradigm of dependence. That's when you actually need somebody and you can't get by without them. Those of us that have raised children, babies, my new grandson Connor, right? I mean, he is as vulnerable as you get. Without any intervention, Connor will die. He needs intervention. Right? The other thing we know, by the way, that's lethal is that if Connor doesn't get held, touched, that what we're learning is that human touch is as important as nutrients, the bottle or the breast or the nutrients that Connor needs to sustain. Of course, Connor doesn't have to worry about that. Everybody wants a whole Connor, so he's getting a lot of touching. But the notion of dependence is this paradigm where I need you. I can't survive without you. You are absolutely essential to me. Okay? The next paradigm that emerges for us as we begin to grow and develop is the paradigm of independence. Independence, right? And those of us who have raised teenagers, we know about independence, right? Where our kids think they know more than we do, right? They're independent. Dad, don't tell me about drugs. You don't have to tell me about this, right? That I know. That's the paradigm of independence. I don't need anybody. I know it all. But for those people who actually then begin to enjoy life success, we move from the paradigm of independence to the paradigm of interdependence. Right? And the paradigm of interdependence is not about you and not about me, it's about we. It's how powerful we are when we're connected and united with people. How better we are, how more successful we are when we build those relationships. And so interdependence as a philosophical construct is at the core of understanding social capital. Because social capital is the stuff that connects us, right? And interdependence suggests that there are some things we can do, and there are some things we cannot do. There are some times when we need other people, and other times when we can go it alone. Right? And that's sort of just a balance of life. And so this idea that occasionally we're dependent is natural in life. And that we're also independent is natural in life when we move to this paradigm of interdependence. Right? And so, to understand social capital, let me frame it this way. I want to just present to you this trigger question. And sociologists ask this question all the time in order to garner the highest quality of life outcomes that there are. So here's the question. If you could wish for three things for yourself or somebody that you love, what would you wish for? Right? When Connor was born, right, and kind of held him and looked into his eyes, right? What were we hoping for Connor? I have 3 children, right? When they were born and they handed me those little babies, and I looked in those tigers' eyes, what did I want for them? Now, when this question is asked around the world by sociologists, here are the top 3 answers. Health. Health is always number 1. In fact, when our children were born, I remember making my calls to Condeluci Hill, right, the perfunctory call to announce the birth of the baby. And the very first question that everyone asked us was, is mom healthy? Is the baby healthy? Right, health. Health is absolutely, fundamentally, the highest quality of life indicator known to humankind. That's why healthcare should not be some political debate. We should not have to be debating this or fighting about this. This should be a given for our society. It should be a given. It is the most important outcome in life. And if any of you have ever had a health scare, you know this. You know this, and your family knows it. There's nothing more important than that. But then there's happiness is one of the second items that pop up in terms of answers. And I look at a little Connor, and I'm hoping that he has a happy life, right? That he smiles more than cries. That he's respected and valued and loved, right? Happiness. And then longevity. You know, hopefully little Connor is going to live a long life, and preferably a healthy, happy life. In fact, suicide data suggests that people take their lives primarily because either they're struggling with a health issue or they're unhappy, they're depressed. Those are 2 of the root causes that are in front of suicide data. So longevity, these 3 things are really powerful. But here's the most powerful thing. Sociological studies over the last 45, 50 years have determined very clearly that these 3 things, the most important things in life, health, happiness, and longevity, are tied to relationships. It's tied to social capital. And the studies are really clear that what makes us healthy is not necessarily good medicine or a good doc. What really makes us healthy are the people in our lives that hold our hand when we have a procedure, that go fetch the medicine for us to bring it back when we're in a sick bed, that the person that brings over the hot chicken noodle soup, you know, that when we have a really bad cold. What affects our health are the people around us. Now, scientists have really clearly articulated 2 pieces to what makes social capital enhance health. One is called the main effect, and that's when people specifically do something for you. They hang with you in your hospital room all night long when you're struggling with it, right? That's called the main effect. But the second effect is really powerful too. It's called stress buffering. And that is, our relationships literally make our stress go down. It really does. We know we have people we can count on, then that takes stress off the table for you. If there's somebody that you can reach out to, that you know is going to be there for you when the chips are down, your stress levels actually come down. And when your stress levels come down, guess what happens? Your immunity system actually goes up. Your immune system and your stress are tied together. They're inverse curves. And so if your stress is lowered, then your immunity systems are higher. And that's what happens with a lot of families who are under great stress because of the caretaking situation that they have to deal with, right? Is that they can become sick themselves, right? And so the idea of relationships mitigating or enhancing our health or mitigating the illnesses that we experience is established clearly in the literature. Right? In fact, just a couple years ago, I wrote a book called Social Capital: The Key to Macro Change. And in fact, I'm gonna give Jill a copy for the door prize of the book for tomorrow. But in the book, we really look at all the literature, what's been out there, and we try to make it digestible and not highly academic. We really want to popularize this notion of social capital because it is a critical ingredient that can really lead to life success. I mean, happiness as well is tied deeply to social. I mean, it's hard to be happy by yourself. I mean, stop and think about it. If something really good happens in your life, you can't wait to tell somebody that you care about this good thing. I mean, it's almost like happiness is off the table unless we're with other people. Right? It is absolutely tied to our social capital. And finally, here's the one that more recently has really shocked the scientists. And that is the notion that what leads to a longer life is not necessarily good genes or doing all the things that the public health people tell us we should do, exercise, diet, get good sleep. It's actually tied to relationships. Let me tell you about a little town in Pennsylvania called Roseto. It's just up near Wilkes-Barre, and any of you, the Pennsylvania delegation that might be here, might know this. Mary Jo, how you feeling? Okay, good. You're around all your social capital, so you're definitely feeling good. But the notion of Roseto is really a powerful example of social capital. Roseto is a small little mining community, mostly Italian immigrants that live there, and they work the mines. Temple University in Philadelphia, where all Mary Jo's kids have gone to school, fine university in Philly, they have a clinic up in Roseto, right, a medical clinic. And one of the things they began to discover was that the residents in Roseto were living longer than typical norms. Their life expectancy was longer than what is typically ascribed. So after a couple years looking at these data, the scientists from Temple said, we gotta, there's something going on up there in Roseto. We want to find out what it is. So they send a team to Roseto to look at what's the special sauce here, what's happening to Roseto that's allowing these folks to live longer. And so they looked at diet, and they discovered these guys ate a lot of pasta, and they loved the pasta fazool, and they were eating all this Italian diet, and some of that's good, and some of that's pretty heavy, and maybe wouldn't be on a dietitian's list as the best food to ingest. So then they scratched their head and they said, well, let's look at lifestyle. And they discovered that they smoked perotis, and they played bocce, and they were drinking wine. And they looked at sleeping patterns. They looked at their work and the demographics of their work. These guys were in the mines, right? Dirt and dust and hard work, right? They're working these mines. And yet they were living long. The only thing that they could come up with that literally led to that longer life expectancy was the relationships that people had, and how families knew each other, and they took care of each other, and they watched out for each other, and if somebody struggled a bit, there was another family that was there to help in the struggle. And it was social capital that literally led to that longer lifestyle. And so these ideas of social capital quite simply boil down to the more social capital you have, and the quality of those relationships literally lead to a healthy, happy, longer life. But there's more. And as scientists have begun to look at social capital, they're beginning to discover these things. These are called pro-social behaviors, right? Tolerance, kindness, compassion, integrity, fairness. Those are, we all want to live in a world that's like this. And what they've come to discover is that social capital is at the core of these things happening. Quite simply, you treat your friends like this, and people you don't know, you treat, maybe nice, maybe not. Let me give an example. Let me listen to this example. You have a big meeting that you have to go to in Birmingham, downtown Birmingham. And you get there, you park your car, and you're walking to your meeting, and you walk along the street, and you see in the gutter a homeless guy. Right? There. We know homeless folks are all over, right? You see a homeless guy laying in the gutter, and you're walking to your meeting. Now, you're a compassionate person. I know that about you. You have a loving heart. I know that. You wouldn't do this kind of work if you didn't, right? But yet, as you're walking along, you see this homeless guy, and you begin to say, oh, look at that. This is terrible. This should not happen in my town of Birmingham. I'm going to call somebody about this. I'm going to talk to the mayor. I'm going to write a letter. But if you're walking down that same street and you see a homeless guy laying there and you get a little closer and it's your Uncle John, right? It's somebody that you know. somebody that you grew up with, somebody that was a part of your social capital network. You don't walk onto that meeting. Guess what you do? You stop and you kneel down and you pick this person up and you literally intervene, right? And it's because the only variable that changed there was the social capital you had with that person, as opposed to the compassion in your heart. So pro-social behaviors go up through relationships. Now this is, from a respite point of view, this is really a powerful notion around family isolation, because if families become less connected, then these kinds of things don't happen as often with them or for them as they might if they stay connected or if we help them get more connected. Right? Because these things, these pro-social behaviors go up. But there's even more. I mean, this is really powerful. You know, Gary and I have been long-time disability advocates, right? And I know that in Gary's program, United Ability, the focus of helping people get jobs is front and center, right? Because we know people with disabilities are unemployed. Up to 76% of adults with disabilities between the ages of 16 and 60 are unemployed. So we know that. So how do we help people get jobs? But one of the things we now know is that getting a job and keeping a job are tied to relationships. Your first job, your very first job, think about it, was probably teed up by your mom, by your dad, somebody they knew, your older brother. In fact, a recent study showed that 81% of the respondents indicated they got their first job through a relationship. But let me even take this one step further. The current job you have now was probably not, you probably got that job not because you're so, you know, your resume is so good, or your background is really powerful, or you're handsome, or you're, you know, really cute. You got that job because on the application you had to list 3 names, right? You know what I'm talking about? 3 names on the application, right? References. That's your social capital that will lie for you. And lie they did. You even called them up. You said to them, look, I'm going for that big program with Arch. You know, I get this chance to get this job. And if Jill calls, I listed you as a reference. If Jill calls, will you please say something nice about me? But it's true. Getting jobs, keeping jobs are tied to relationships. We now know through exit interviews that when people get fired, or oftentimes when they leave a job, it's because they can't get along. Not because they can't do the gig, just they can't get along with their coworkers, right? This idea of solving problems is really powerful. Putnam spends a lot of time looking at problem solutions and how social capital informs that. Now, families that we support who are providing care, they're struggling with a lot of problems, right? The solution of problems is oftentimes found in the bosom of relationships. Being safe, being psychologically stable, people advancing and achieving. You know, people advance, not because they're so good at their gig. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? I mean, that's that phrase, that cliche is powerful because it's true. That notion of advancement is tied to people that you know and ways that you get connected. Wadsworth said years and years ago, without friends, the world is a wilderness, right? And this is really true for families that are becoming more and more isolated because of their challenges. Let me share with you that there are 3 values that we know about social capital. The way your relationships actually help you. The first is called informational value. And this is the lowest hanging fruit in the social capital value register, right? The notion that people tell you something, you call them up. In fact, probably the last book you read, or maybe the last movie you went to, or the last new restaurant you went to, was because a friend told you about it. They said, oh, you want good spaghetti in Pittsburgh? Go to the Prima Donna, right? So you come to Pittsburgh, you're there for a conference, you say, oh, my buddy Al Condeluci told me that the best Italian restaurant is at the Prima Donna, the best Italian food. I'm going to go. And you go to the Prima Donna, and my friend Joe Costanzo takes care of you, gives you these zucchini, and gives you this wonderful day, and you say, you have a great, meal. Right? That's informational value. But then there's the second is emotional value. And that is emotional value is your relationships that got your back. I could ask if we were doing a workshop here, and I asked you to think about who are those people you really rely on, that you could call when the chips are down. If something really bad happened, who would you reach out to? Right? And you would be able to articulate a number of people that you know. Now, they may tease you, maybe give you a little hard time, but in the end, they'll be there for you. Right? That's emotional value. Again, that lowers your stress because you got this network of people that you can count on. Right? And then the most powerful level is called instrumental value. Instrumental value is when your friends actually do something for you that saves you money. When I was writing the book, Social Capital, I was looking at all the literature, and I found an article in the Atlantic Monthly. Right? It was actually written by a reporter, not by a sociologist. But this reporter had gone to a conference and heard a talk like this. And he said, this got to be bogus. It can't. This is fake news. This can't be true. And so he decided to put it to the test. And so what he did is after he heard the talk, he went back home and he made a little matrix. And on the one side, he identified all the things his wife did for the family. Right? He took his wife, identified all the things that she does for the family. She goes out and does all the shopping. She does the laundry. She does the cooking. She cleans the house. Sound familiar, ladies? Okay. So he listed all these things. She chauffeurs the kids to their little league or their soccer practice. She counsels him when he has a bad day. Even identified sexual favors. Okay. He identified all these things that she does. And then he identified the frequency. Now, how often do you clean the house? How often do you shop? How often do you chauffeur the kids? Frequency. And then he went on Craigslist, and he identified if he had to hire somebody to do that for him those many days, how much would it cost? Right? Now, you can go on Craigslist and you could hire people to do anything. Right? You could hire somebody to do your laundry, do your shopping. You could hire somebody to chauffeur your kids. He identified all of those things, and he took the going rate, and he multiplied it, and then he totaled it. And guess how much it came out to annually, an annualization figure? $265,000 a year. Ladies, remember this. Next time you get grief, say, I heard this guy from Pittsburgh, he was talking about social media. He said, I'm worth at least $265 to you, Jack. And you give me trouble with these $100 shoes? You better back down. But we don't build friendships because we're going to save money. But in the end, relationships save us unbelievable amounts of money. They really do. Here's a simple one. You're moving from point A to point B, and so there's two things you could do. You can call a moving company, and they're going to charge you up through the yin-yang, or you can get some pizza and some beer and call your friends, and a U-Haul. Right? And your friends come over, and you kind of make a fun day of it. Right? Even though they're schlucking all your books. In fact, I told all my friends, if you're ever moving, I'm not lifting one box of books ever again. Right? But the notion of even something that simple is at the core of social capital. Putnam said in his book, Bowling Alone, Putnam wrote an incredible book, came out in 2000. It was called Bowling Alone. Right? And now, Putnam's interest in social capital wasn't from a respite perspective. It was really from a civic, making society better, making a better democracy. And so he's looking at, engagement and participation from that angle. But he said if you belong to no group or community and you decide to join one, you cut your risk of dying in half over the next year. So if you don't remember anything from this talk, go join something tonight. And we'll see you next year when we gather. But the notion is that when you connect, when you engage, you actually increase your survival. you increase your survival. And the evidence is all over the board. So, where do we find social capital as you're thinking about this for your families and in trying to really see your families get a little bit more connected? Where might those groups be? And of course, these are just some of the venues of where social capital is found. That these are platforms for meeting people. They're platforms for connecting with people. Right? And so the notion of really thinking about what the families you support do, where do they go, how might we be able to stimulate or help in enhancing or getting more of those opportunities. So, how do we develop social capital? We do it through engagement. And here's the thing about engagement. Nobody ever teaches us how to engage. Have you ever taken a class on engagement? Like a college class or a high school class? Right? There's no formal way we learn engagement. We learn it through observation. And this is one of the really big reasons why families who have a child with a disability, and when they become more isolated, they don't engage as much, two bad things happen. The family becomes vulnerable, and then the kid with a disability doesn't get, or the kids without disabilities, don't get a lens on the appropriate ways to engage. Right? I remember teaching my sons and my daughter how to shake hands with people. Right? How to shake something. The very first step of engagement, meeting somebody, shaking their hand, or hugging. Yeah, I mean, I hug a lot, and you got to be sensitive to the best way to hug. Right? You don't hug too much and bear hug, smash somebody, right? But you don't want to just like hug, just like the old Catholic school dance, right? Where the nun would come by and put a stick between you and the body of the other person you're dancing with. But the notion of these kinds of simple engagement patterns are observed, right? We sort of learn them by watching them. Right? And so, I'm going to just share a little bit about this study we've been doing. We took 50 families in Pittsburgh through class and through Chatham University in Pittsburgh. And we identified 50 families, 25 who have children with disabilities, significant disabilities, and 25 families who had children, similar demographic, gender, age, but did not have a disability label. Right? So we had two cohorts, and we repeated the study in Brisbane, Australia. Right? We have a sister agency in Brisbane, and so in Brisbane, our partner there, MAMRE, took 50 people, 25 with children with disabilities, 25 with children who do not have a disability label. And we did an engagement survey. Robert Putnam developed an engagement survey out of Harvard. And the engagement survey looks at a number of different indicators. How often do you go out? Who do you go out with? Where do you go? Do you know your neighbors? How long have you lived in your neighborhood? Have you ever been in a neighbor's home? How would you rate your neighborhood? Those are some of the questions on the engagement survey. And so we ran this survey, and we're now just starting to crunch the numbers. In fact, just last week, we had our second meeting at Chatham to really begin to look at and compare and look for statistical significance in some of the numbers. So here's some of the things that we're finding initially in this study. Now, we're still in the middle of it, and we really plan to publish this, but that children with disabilities are less likely to stay connected with others via the internet. And we find this huge digital divide happening for the families who had children with disabilities. Now, there's also an economic divide. We find that the families who had children with disabilities had less disposable income than the families who had children without disabilities. That families with children with disabilities were more likely to report not receiving enough support, right, from friends or from systems. And you know this, right, because you deal with it every day. But nobody's actually studied it or tried in some kind of an empirical way to get our hands around it. Children with disabilities tend not to see their school friends outside of school. Big difference there. The kids without disabilities, they had a lot of play dates. They were doing a lot of things. The kids with disabilities were just staying at home. They were more socially isolated. It appeared that families with disabilities are less likely to get support from other family members than families who have children without disabilities. Now, again, none of this should be news to any of us that are in the field, right? You know this stuff. But again, we know it anecdotally. Now we're starting to codify it. And this is the stuff we can use with Senator Collins and some of the other policy makers in relationships to how important respite is. Now, here's some of the speculations we have as to why. Right? And again, some of this should not be new, right? It appears that social reactions are negative when families who have children with disabilities go out. Somebody has a child on the autism spectrum and they go out somewhere and the kid has a meltdown. And other people around Chuck E. Cheese or wherever it might be, they roll their eyes or they move away. Those negative optics are really powerful for families who have children with disabilities. The cry rooms in churches, right? You got this crying kid, there's where you go, up there. That's your little room up in that balcony. We don't want to hear your kid crying, is the message. And so families really begin to say, well, rather than sit up there, I'm just not going. I'm just not going to engage. Families with children who have disabilities do not feel as welcomed in places. And there's actually some places that reject families who have kids with disabilities, some restaurants. There was a restaurant in Pittsburgh that was just in the news. Mary Jo, you might remember seeing that. It was in Penn Hills. And they didn't want families who had kids with disabilities to come in because they wanted the other guests to have a good experience. That was their rationale. Families with disabilities have less disposable dollars. The energy and time necessary to engage for families who have children with disabilities is burdensome. Accessibility of the engagement venue is difficult to get in. You know families who have children with disabilities, they have to plot out when they're going somewhere. It's almost like some tactical mission. Like, will we get in? And once we get in, there's a place we can pee? And, all of those things get built into the equation. And then families who have children with disabilities are tired, right? It's just like, man, oh man, I'm just too tired to go out. I have to deal with all this stuff, and it's just not worth it. And so, we're beginning to know the reasons why families don't engage. And this gets me then to this next end. How do we support families? And what are some of the strategies? And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly as it relates to what we know about social capital. That there are 4 steps in the books that I'm going to give to Jill. We try to articulate these steps. Now, this is really written to support individuals, but it's transferable, it's generalizable to supporting families. The very first step of engagement is finding the bridge. Sociologists call this bridging social capital. I mean, you came here to this conference, and maybe this is the first time you've been to a respite conference, and you don't know anybody. But we all have the similar experience of supporting families or being a caregiver ourselves. That's a bridge we all can share, right? So that's this idea of finding a bridge. What is it that connects people? And then the second is matching venues and clusters. And you can actually help families with the tactical stuff they have to do. Once you find the venue, you can do the homework around, will it be easy to get in? Will be able to bring all the regalia we might need with our child, right? So literally finding the matching cluster and community that aligns with the affinity. And then understanding community behavior, right? This is an anthropological step. But literally, if you're going to connect, you've got to know what's expected of me, right? What are people going to expect in terms of my behavior, in terms of where I sit, in terms of how I behave, what's expected. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, can we find a gatekeeper, someone who can buffer the intersection or the penetration into the new venue? Can we find somebody who can serve as a gatekeeper? And now a gatekeeper is somebody who's indigenous to the community. They're already a member of this group, but if they endorse a new family coming in, then we have a sociological concept called value juxtaposition. Sounds like a big term, but it's really, really simple. You've all been a part of value juxtaposition. And that's when the value of one person ties to the value of the new person, and the value of the new person starts to go up because of the value of the first person. Now, when Mary introduced me, she was my gatekeeper here today. Right? She introduced me to you. You know her. You know the work that she's doing here in Alabama with the council. And she's valued, right? A lot of years she's been out there working hard. And so she introduces me. You don't know me at all, right? But my value really begins to rise because you know she wouldn't introduce you to somebody who's not going to be perhaps helpful, useful, or might have something to offer. It's called value juxtaposition. Gatekeepers bring it. So gatekeepers are natural. The two sociological theories here are social influence theory and value juxtaposition theory. A social influence theory is very simple. And in fact, do you remember your mother trying to pick your friends? Right? You come home with a buddy or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, guy that you're hanging out with, and your mom, after they leave, your mom says, "No, Al, you shouldn't hang around with Gary. He smokes, he drinks. You want to hang around with Guy. He's a good guy. He's a good person," right? So your mom understood social influence theory. As your mom knew that if you hung around with people who are doing bad things, guess what you might begin to do? Some bad things. Do you remember your mom said, if they jump off the bridge, are you going to jump with them? You said, "I don't know, Mama. They're having fun down there. I think I'm going." Right? But the notion of social influence theory is really powerful. I mean, if a family is valued and they're seen with another family who can tend to be devalued, that devalued family's value begins to rise a bit based on the valued family. And so, the magic of social capital is when similarities outweigh differences, right? We know that differences are there. We know we all struggle with differences and impositions that happen in our lives, right? But literally, this creation of the bridges to other people lessen that burden. It lessens that burden. So connections with other people, or families' connections with other families, take that family deeper into its own soul. And through others, we get to know ourselves better. Okay? And this deeper fulfillment is the fuel that helps us lead a better life. It enlivens our humanness. My last quote, let me just finish with this. This is a quote from Albert Schweitzer. And every time I show this quote, I hearken back to an experience I had with my dad. As my dad's situation became more overt, and we weren't getting the support that we needed as a family, we just rallied around and we took care of Dad. And so Dad's situation really, he needed total care toward the end of his life. And so we just split it up. Me and my brother took the baths and took care of the personal stuff, and my sisters handled the other things. You know how that goes with families, right? And so one day I was giving my dad a bath. This was about 2 weeks before he died. And I was in the bathtub and I was washing him. Now I've given people baths. I've done attendant care. It's not a big deal to me. But giving your dad a bath is something unique. It's a little different, right? So my dad started to cry in the bathtub. And I didn't know what the problem was, and I didn't know how to handle it. So I said, Dad, no crying in the bathtub. What are you crying for? What's the matter, right? And he said, "I didn't want this for you." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "I didn't want you to have to take care of me." He said, "I should be taking care of you." I said, "Dad, you did. You have taken care of me. And now it's my turn to take care of you, and I am happy to do this. This is not an imposition to me. I don't want you to feel bad about this. And then he paused and he said something that was really powerful. It really affected me emotionally. He said, I don't want you to remember me like this. I don't want you to remember me in this infirmed condition, needing total care. And I started to cry a little bit. I didn't know exactly what to say. And then I realized at that moment what my dad was doing was giving me a gift. He was giving me an opportunity to tell him how we will remember him. Right? And so I did. I told him, I said, Dad, you're my mentor, you're my guide, you've taught me everything, you helped me become the man I am today, and we hugged and we kissed right there in the bathtub. And a couple weeks later, when he died, I had the privilege of doing his eulogy. And you know what a eulogy is, right? It's a summation of a person's life. And that we all are going to get a eulogy at some point, right? And that eulogy is going to be short. It depends on the pastor or the priest. They may allow you 5 minutes, maybe. Right? They usually want them short. And so the person that's going to come up and eulogize you, what are they going to say about you? What do you want them to say? What do you hope they will say? This notion of eulogies is really captured, I think, in this quote from Schweitzer. What we do with our lives individually is not what determines whether we are a success. What determines whether we are a success is how we touch the lives of other people. And you and I we're really fortunate people, right? We have jobs where we touch people. We have jobs that allow us to intervene in a way that's going to empower a family, an individual. We are really fortunate in that regard because we are really writing our own eulogy as we continue down the path. But on the other side of all of this is really if a family or an individual becomes isolated, when they are at the end of their road, then that notion of touching other people is really going to be less. So we have an opportunity right now as respite care professionals to really facilitate that families become more engaged, that individuals who are vulnerable become more engaged, and there are strategies, sociological strategies that are out there to really help us understand that. And so I really want to thank Jill, Mary Jo, Melissa, the whole planning committee. These guys have worked so hard to pull together an incredible opportunity for us at this conference. I am really, really humbled, and I thank them deeply for this invitation. But more, I'm really humbled to be in your presence. That you guys do tough work every day. It's not easy. And we talk about burnout of families. It's also easy for us to burn out. And so use your social capital wisely. Make sure that you stay connected. As you stay connected as a professional, your resiliency enhances, and you become not just a better professional, you become a better person. Thanks so much. God bless you. Let's have a great conference.